Well, hey guys, welcome back to the channel. I'm here with Chuck Salerno from Salerno Motorsports, and I know a lot of you guys in the comments were tearing me up about, Matt, why would you spend a cent on this car when you don't even own the title? And just hear me out for a second. I bought this car, right? I bought it to drive, and I totally understand. I don't want to ruin it and do any more damage that's already done. And that's why I'm here, is because I wanted to really delve into this and see what the heck is wrong with this car before making any type of decision. We did what's called, I guess, a post-purchase inspection. Right?
Yeah, I mean, it's essentially what we would have done as a pre-purchase. It's just unfortunately we're doing it after you already own the car.
Right, but hey, at least now we know some things. Yeah. And I'm going to hand it over to Chuck to talk a little bit about what a PPI is, and also what's wrong with my car. So, Chuck.
In this case, we basically did what would be our standard pre-purchase inspection. And it's broken up into a few different phases, but usually the first step of what we do is a cosmetic inspection. So that's going to include, a visual inspection around the car, looking for any evidence of repaints or, gaps being right in between panels and things like that, anything that indicates previous repair or accident. Then obviously we use an Elko meter, which we'll cover more, I guess, later, to measure the paint thickness, which can kind of show us some things that may not be, visible to the naked eye. The next step of it is a scan. So in the scan, we're going to look for any fault codes in the OBD2 system and then the Ferrari DME. We're also going to read out clutch wear, and we're going to check to see if drive cycles are complete, which kind of gives us an idea if the system's been reset recently.
Okay.
When we did our cosmetic inspection of your car, visually walking around it actually looks quite nice. But Unfortunately, when we put the paint meter on it, it did show that there has been some respray. And in one section of the passenger rear fender, there's also been a filler used. So that was disappointing to find, obviously. The positive side of it is that the quality of the work appears to be very high, and it doesn't look like anything too crazy happened because it was isolated to bodywork, so paint and the filler.
Now, when I had the Carfax ran on this, no accidents came back or anything like that. So how does that happen, in your opinion?
Yeah, so, I mean, Carfax gives people a false sense of confidence because they think that if something happened, it would be on there. Yeah. And in actuality, the only way something's going to show up on a Carfax report would be if the person who had the accident reported it to their insurance, or if there was a police report.
Gotcha.
Now, there are a few shops that are reporting to Carfax, so even if it wasn't one of those two, if they're a shop that reports, it could show up. And in fact, I've seen some people buy cars and then have a damage report show up years later because a shop starts reporting to Carfax and something gets tagged on there. So, there's no replacement for a purchase inspection. Carfax is a nice first step, and obviously if something was on there, it opens up the questions, but even if nothing is on there, you still need to go to those next steps.
You still got to do it. Yeah. Okay, well, all right, it is what it is. Let's go on to the next.
Yeah, so, your car does have a few flaws around it, cosmetically. I mean, nothing too serious, mainly stuff that we would see with normal operation, so that really didn't get tagged as too big of a deal. When we look inside the car, we're looking for, on Ferraris in particular, like sticky interior pieces, which is a common problem, and your car's not bad there. But we also look for dye, because dye is something we commonly see in the interior of Ferraris, where somebody tries to fix a flaw or imperfection in the leather by dyeing it, essentially.
Yeah, when you called me on the phone and you said my driver's seat has died or something, I was like, well, I mean, okay, so it doesn't go back and forth anymore?
Right.
Like what? And I'm like, oh, dye. Like somebody dyed and painted the leather of the seat to cover up some wear or damage.
Yeah, and the quick clue in that, because some guys are better than others, but one way that you can usually tell is if you look at the threads of the seat, where it's been dyed, the threads will be painted over. And so if you follow the threads all the way down, and usually the entry bolster area on the outside for the seat is the common dyed area. But if you follow the threads all the way down, you'll be able to see, if it's been dyed or not.
Man, guys, and maybe you're all much smarter than I never would have thought to look for the stitching to be painted. I mean, now I do, of course, and that's why you get a PPI and you go to a shop that's reputable, but man, it's just something I didn't think about. And
yeah,
my bad.
I mean, it's a big learning experience, and obviously we'd love to meet people before they buy cars, but the post-purchase inspection is actually more common than I'd like it to be. So,
Yeah.
you know. So after we've done our cosmetics, the next thing we're going to is the scan of the car.
Okay.
And when we scan it, you know, we're checking obviously for fault codes, and we're not just checking OBD2, which is just a generic system that all cars have, but we're also looking at the Ferrari side of the computer, you know, in the DME, in the transmission, looking to see, you know, what's there, what's in the history, what's active,
Right.
reading out clutch wear, and checking for drive cycles as well.
Now, you were telling me a little bit off camera about how on the computer that can have a different reading than your visual inspection.
Yeah, so
How does that work? Or
well, so when somebody replaces a clutch in a 360, they reset the computer basically to say that there's a new clutch in there.
okay.
And if that step isn't done, or sometimes the computer doesn't take it properly, then what you can get is you can get a car that has a clutch wear reading that doesn't line up with the actual physical wear on the clutch. So when we're doing an inspection, we're going to remove the underbody paneling. And then once we remove that, we also remove a little inspection plate, and we turn the clutch so that we can take a look at the actual disc and see how visually it's worn. And then we take those two numbers and how the car is behaving to kind of give you an idea of the accurate clutch life remaining. So we're under the car right now, and what we're seeing here is your transmission and where it connects to your engine. We have the inspection plate off so that we can see your clutch disc. And obviously with a Ferrari, you can look in the computer and read out the clutch wear, which is something that we did. Your clutch was reporting about 57% worn. To confirm that, we remove this inspection plate and take a look at the actual clutch. The visual inspection of the clutch shows it's more like 75-80% worn, which is usually where you start to see performance issues with a 360, jumping to neutral and that kind of thing, which obviously you were experiencing, but unfortunately you were experiencing that for a different reason. And once we pulled the drain plug on your transmission and we found bearings on the magnet, it became pretty clear that something inside the gearbox was failing. What we found in there was that a roller cage is failing, and we can't say which one without disassembly, but that's most likely where those bearings are from. And unfortunately, continued operation runs the risks of one of those bearings getting pulled into something as it's shifting and causing mechanical failure. So at this point, we don't think you should drive the car anymore. As we discussed, one of the things we looked at was a visual inspection of the clutch.
Mm-hmm.
And to do that, we come in here, remove the inspection plate, and then we basically turn it using the flywheel. And when we were doing that, we unfortunately noticed a bit of free play there, and that's not normal. Further inspection of that and playing around, there's excessive free play there, and that is from basically what they call crankshaft end float. Okay. And that's an indication that the main bearings in the motor are worn. And that's not something that you would commonly see, but unfortunately is a potential very expensive repair, because obviously when you're talking about the main bearings, you're talking about disassembling the motor pretty completely to get to that area. So
really, to diagnose and to get to it, we'd have to disassemble the motor.
Yeah, I mean, we know the cause because we know what this symptom, what it means.
Okay.
And there's a spec on an acceptable amount of play that could be there, and when we're well past that. So we basically know what we would find if we took it apart, but how bad it really is, I guess we wouldn't know until it was disassembled and we could take a look at the main bearings. The other thing, I guess, is we don't know what else we would find when we did that. We know there's an issue with the main bearings, but are there issues anywhere else? And once it's apart and things are in your hands, it's easy to start saying, oh, I guess we should do this and address that, and it has a snowball effect.
Okay, and then so when that's being disassembled, for the labor costs and all that, I mean, that's not even, it's not like we could piggyback labor, like, oh, we're doing a belt replacement with a clutch, and it's like we're taking apart an engine.
Yeah, it's different, but there is obviously overlap, because in removing, the engine, you'd be removing the transmission. So things would overlap with each other, but not as completely as you would obviously like them to. Well, so yeah, there was one other thing up front, and there's like an aluminum subframe for the front bumper, and it helps support it, and things are mounted off of it. And again, once we had the cover off, we saw that in the right front, that frame's cracked. And it looks like it's been previously repaired based on what we see, It can be repaired again, and honestly, in the grand scheme of things, it's not that big of a deal. It's probably occurred from a bottom out at some point.
Okay.
But we did note that, and something that, as we're addressing these other items, we would want to have taken care of.
With the paint, there are different ranges in terms of the thickness, and when you're getting your pre-purchase inspection on these cars, I've learned that it's important to even ask if they have a paint meter. I didn't know this thing even existed. So Chuck, tell me about this thing.
Yeah, so it's a very helpful tool, especially on a car like yours where paint appears very nice when you walk around it. But the meter doesn't lie, and when we put it on, what it basically tells us is the thickness between the base metal and the probe at the bottom of the meter. And a typical car is going to be between 4 and 7 mils of thickness. And a mil is 1,000th of an inch, so we're talking about very small measurement here. But using this, we can get a sense of if a car is original, if it's had repaint, if it's had filler, which unfortunately is the case with your car. So Ferraris are trickier because you will see thicker ranges that can be original, and so there's additional thought that has to go into inspecting the body of a Ferrari. But on a car like yours, where unfortunately the range goes anywhere from like 5 mils off my scale, it's pretty clear that there's been paint work and filler used in certain places.
Yeah, and I didn't mention you guys. It's not just Chuck here. This is actually a family-owned business. His dad, Ben, has been working on these cars for over 40 years, and so I imagine, Chuck's kind of learned a few things along the way.
My parents actually opened this business when I was about 6 months old. So I grew up here and around it, but my dad's, been playing with these cars for just over 40 years now, which is pretty cool.
Oh, that's good. And a lot of the YouTubers have recommended in Northern California that this is the place to go. And so I did kind of go off of that. I go, well, clearly my decision-making skills with this car, I'm going to start trusting some other people. And I am very happy I've come here so far.
So there were several things that we saw in your car, and there's obviously a range of not so serious to much more serious.
Okay.
Starting off, just in taking off your underbody paneling, unfortunately, your underbody paneling did have some damage. It looks like it was previous damage because somebody's attempted to repair it. The repair is functional in the sense it's not going to come off, but it's just not aesthetically great looking.
Right.
No one gets under there to see that though, so it's not the end of the world. We also did see some fluid staining on the cover up in the front, which is part of the AC problem that we'll talk about in a minute.
Okay.
But that was pretty much what we saw, and then we took the plates off. So
yes, it leaked all over the place.
Well, it did, yeah. So the dye came out of the system because there is a dye charge in there to help find leaks when there's a problem. And so what we saw was in the right front condenser, you have a leak, and you also have a smaller leak from the compressor itself, which is pretty common on 360s.
Okay.
And yours has actually already been replaced once. I think functionally the issue with the condenser is causing your problem, and most likely, the seepage I see at the compressor isn't going to be a big deal, but the condenser up in the front is definitely an issue that we'd have to address to get the AC system back up and running. Moving on from the AC stuff, we just took a general look around the car, and one of the things that we look at is obviously suspension. There are some torn boots in your suspension, like boots that cover your lower ball joints and tie rods. And, given the age and mileage of the car, that's not unusual to see. There was also a little bit of free play, I think from the right front ball joint.
Okay.
The right front lower ball joint has a little bit of free play. That's pretty common on 360s as well, and Hill Engineering actually makes some upgraded lower ball joints that we would use if we did that replacement. But again, in the grand scheme of things here with what we're talking about, not the biggest of deals. I will say that another thing that we look at is obviously timing belts, because on a Ferrari, a timing belt service is a big conversation. Most places are going to say every 5 years, 30,000 miles, that should be done.
Right.
And looking at your belts, there is a date on them, and we can see it's 14, 15 are kind of the dates on the belts.
Okay.
Doesn't mean that's when the service was done, but that's obviously when the belts were produced. But at least we know that it was done after that. So we know you're kind of in that 5-year window. And in looking at the belts, it's difficult to tell the quality of them because they are generally newer since you're doing them on 5 years. But one thing you can look at is there's writing on the back of the belts. And so we look to see how crisp and clear that writing is to help us get an indication of maybe how long these belts have been on here and how worn they are.
No, that's a cool trick. Yeah, when I bought this, you guys, it didn't come with any type of service records or anything like that. And normally you would want those so you can kind of gauge when you need these major services to be done. And I kind of knew, I was like, well, it's an F1 transmission, it's probably going to need belts. And so I kind of had that in my head already when I purchased it. But I definitely didn't have everything that's listed here in my head. And, what are you going to do? So.
Yeah. Finishing up here with what a purchase inspection would include. Last thing is usually a test drive.
Right.
And your car was a pretty brief test drive, and unfortunately that's because of what we'll talk about with the gearbox. But normally at the end of the inspection, we do drive the car, make sure it performs as we would expect for the age and mileage, make sure accessories are working properly, it shifts normally, and all those things. And that's generally how we kind of conclude our inspection. And then at the end of the inspection, you obviously get a written report. During the inspection, we take photos, so we'll put that into a Dropbox folder so you kind of get a sense of what we're talking about. Because
no, that helps.
Yeah,
Because, when you're not a car tech, photos help. I mean, when
Sure.
someone's, slapping you with a $12,000 bill, it'd be nice to see a picture of all the little parts that are, broken or whatever.
and to understand why, it's
Yeah.
like this. So we do like to include photographs, and then obviously we would send you the report, and usually I would have this conversation over the phone, with the
Right.
person looking at the photographs and looking at the report that I've sent. But since you're local, we get to have it in person.
No, that's very helpful. And, I was talking to one of my friends about this, and they got a PPI done on one of their Lamborghinis, and they were really unhappy with the shop who did it. This was in Los Angeles, but because they just gave them like a 2-sentence description. I'm like, oh yeah, everything seems to be good. You might need an oil change in about 7,000 miles or something. But I was like, man, this guy spent so much money on a PPI, barely got anything. He didn't even get photos. And so I'm like, why? I wish there was a standard out there to where you could have shops like Salerno Motorsports. It's all standardized. Wouldn't that be amazing? But,
Yeah, unfortunately there's not a standard, and
Yeah.
and the quality and cost does range dramatically. So one of the things that I always tell people is very important when you're scheduling that purchase inspection appointment to ask the right questions, to ask if they have a paint meter, to
Okay.
ask if they regularly work on this type of car, and to ask what the scope of the inspection is going to be and what type of documentation of that inspection you'll get. Because you really need to know those things, or you could spend, anywhere from $500 to $1,000 and be really disappointed with the result.
Yeah, and I'm with this. we'll talk about the price later, but it's incredibly detailed, and it's unfortunate seeing some of these numbers and all the stuff wrong with it. But at the same time, that's what's needed. When you have a high value car like this that has so many mechanical parts that aren't really put together like many other cars, you do need a professional to actually help and guide you along the way. Let's see what all this comes out to, you guys.
Yeah, so the first thing I'll talk about is the transmission, because that's something I've looked into the most and we talked about the most, and that does have a range, because we'll have a choice when we go in whether we just specifically go in and repair what's wrong and leave the rest as it is,
Okay.
or if we do something more comprehensive, which I do think would build more value in the car, but would obviously cost more money, replacing more components in the gearbox to maybe give it a rebuilt, title, so that you could say, this gearbox has been rebuilt, and build more value to you as the owner of the car.
Okay.
But obviously, we would have to make that determination once we took it apart and really saw what the damage is and how the rest of the gearbox looks wear-wise.
Gotcha.
So assuming, the worst, I guess, let's say, that you do want to do a rebuild, and obviously we have the clutch and the transmission mount and the differential to sort out, you could be looking around $15,000 to do that type of work.
Okay.
And I know you kind of knew that might be the case based on the experience you were having.
Yeah. Didn't really realize that type
The dollar
of cost.
title,
But
yeah.
that's why we're here.
Yeah.
Alrighty. Okay.
So the next thing we discovered, which obviously was unexpected, was that crankshaft end float being out of spec, basically being excessive.
And this is something, I have actually, despite what all you guys say, I have researched these cars quite a bit over the years. And I had no idea about this crankshaft and float
Well,
situation, that this is a thing.
yeah, it's not actually like a thing in the sense of an issue known to 360s. I mean, it's a
Okay.
thing in the sense that this could happen to any car. It's something, a wear spec that exists, but it's not typical. This is the first 360, sadly, that I've actually seen this on. And you know what it indicates is just wear in the main bearing thrust bearing area of the engine. And again, though, the tough thing here is that it's going to require disassembly to really pinpoint what's going on, and it's going to raise these questions of what do we replace, what don't we replace, and how comprehensive are we going to be, and what's the goal.
Right.
And you know, obviously, we can talk more in detail about that, and there will be some overlap between some of the other things that we've discussed and want to do, but just to give you a range or an idea, I mean, I would think that the engine side of it could easily be in the $20,000 to $30,000 range. Yeah.
Okay. All right. So we'll tack that on to the
Yeah.
total there. All right.
So some of the less serious concerns that you had were in the interior, some wear and some broken pieces. One was an ashtray, which new factory ashtray has a list price of about $395.
Okay.
And I do say list price because you will see in the Ferrari world a variety of prices.
Yeah.
And so
I was even on eBay looking at these things, but yeah.
yeah, so it's important to shop, and even us, we have multiple suppliers that we use because we do see variation between them. And so to make sure that you're getting the best value for your customer, it's important to spend some time looking around. But I did just give you some numbers just that are representative of the list so that you have an idea of what you're going to spend. And yeah, so like an ashtray is $395.
Yeah.
New air vents are about $290 each.
Okay.
Front hood shocks, which you had talked to me about because the front hood doesn't stay up on its own.
Right.
Small thing, about $150 parts and labor to replace those.
Okay. That right now has been the least expensive price I've heard all day.
Yeah.
$150, and that thing won't bonk me in the head anymore.
Yes.
Oh.
I didn't spend a lot of time on the AC system just because there were so many other things that we were talking about. But I mean that repair I would imagine could be in the $1,000 to $3,000 range, and maybe more.
Okay.
The compressor really was an issue, but again, whereas some overlap between some other stuff that we're going to be doing and part prices and really pinpointing where that leak at the condenser is. Is it on the condenser side? Is it on the line?
Right.
More time could be spent there.
All right. So we have. We're over $30,000.
Yeah.
Minimum
Unfortunately.
with this thing. So it is what it is. I know you guys see me laughing a lot about this, and you're like, "Oh wow, Matt, you take it so well." But I think we all use humor as a mask with things, and this was a very emotional purchase for me when I bought it in January, and it does massively suck that this is happening. But I just look at it like, you could let it destroy your life, or you could just move on and accept it for what it is, that this was just a crappy experience that's still ongoing, and things will just have to get sorted, when they get sorted. I'm not going to be spending any more money on this car. I need to get the title first before I could even do anything. And then once I get that, I really have some decisions to make.
Yeah, a real serious conversation about what makes the most sense and how to deal with this car and what your end goal is with the car before we tore into this type of work.
Right. I mean, spending more than half its value in repairs is just on any purchase is obscene. Obviously, the moral of this story is if you're looking at buying an exotic car or really any car that is a lot of money to you, get a pre-purchase inspection. A PPI for you guys would be like $2,000 probably, or
Yeah. No, so a PPI on an exotic car usually is a 3-hour inspection. It's about $540.
so for $540, I could have said, no, I'm going to walk away from this crazy Ferrari mess. Not even with the CNC Motors fraud fiasco, but just from the repair standpoint. I mean, this could have been a car from a private party.
and maybe the guy just drove it super hard, but his best friend has a Bondo shop and they just, made it look really nice before selling it to me. So just wanted, you guys have been following, the channel. Yes, Matt, get a pre-purchase inspection. Well, so now if you guys are in Northern California, I suggest coming here.